Hello and welcome to Living a Culture of Life podcast by Human Life International. I'm your host, Colleen, and I'm joined today by Father Boquet, our president. Welcome back, Father.
Hello, Colleen. Great to be back with you again after a few mission trips around the world.
Yeah, it's really exciting. I'm glad to have you back in the studio, and I know you've got more travel coming up, so we'll sneak a couple of podcast episodes in here.
That's good. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. Today we're going to be talking about something really interesting that we've never really gotten into in the show before, and that's vocations and discerning religious life. So before we dive into that and like you telling your vocation story, which I've never heard, so I'm very interested in hearing, why does the priestly vocation or a call to religious life, how does that fit into a culture of life? What role do priests and religious play in forming a culture of life?
Sure. Well, Colleen, I know we're going to get into this a little more detail, but it really kind of look at the life of the priest or the religious man or woman, and how they influence the culture around them. Mm-hmm. So whether they be in a parish setting where you have an encounter with the parish priest on a regular basis, and we'll talk more about that with myself, but that has a tremendous influence upon the mind of a young person when they see the priest and how the community responds to him, reacts toward him, his influence upon them, just from the liturgy itself, his placement, especially to a young child, looking at these things, asking questions, but also just the way that the priest or the religious lives can be very inspirational because obviously many times our clergy and our religious are living countercultural to what other people see in their lives. The busyness of the day, the lifestyles, the vacations, and the various things that families are doing, skiing, going to the water park. And, it doesn't mean the priest is not doing some of that possibly, but they don't see that as regularly. So there's something of awe that inspires them, and especially as their family talks about the priest in a positive way, and they hear their grandparents and extended family, it really plants within the mind of the person that there's something unique here. And so from the priest's point of view, how does he influence the culture of life? Well, if he or the religious man or woman is truly living as the church would ask us to live, and to be a light within the community, then we ourselves are pointing people towards something. Something, of course, in this case, the something is God, and the life that God wishes us to live. So that in itself is prompting a culture of life because they're helping us to live virtuously, to strive for holiness, to live in the light of the gospel, to live out the Beatitudes, to live out the corporal and spiritual works of mercy. So in a way, they're creating a culture within their parish community, the school, the hospital, the nursing facility, the local convent, wherever that influence may be. They really are building a culture of life, kind of a brick at a time, a person at a time. And if you think about the levels of experience that the priest or religious are having, for example, Carmelite sisters may be caring for the elderly at the end of life. I mean, you might see some sisters working in nursing care and in the hospital setting, the schools. So in other words, each one has a way of entering in to kind of expose the culture of life. And so the role of the priest and the religious, and for here at HLI, we know how important that is because all of our educational programs include religious and include our clergy because we know the importance when they are formed properly in the church's bioethical teaching and how they bring that to bear in their community. So we know the importance of it. So definitely the priest and the religious have an important role to be not only play, but to be a part of, to participate in.
So even though they don't obviously have families of their own, like they're not getting married and having children, they're able to enrich the community and offer something that parents might not be able to for children, to be able to create this full culture that values all life.
I think it's in a sense it's not so much they're offering something different, which is not what you said, but the idea is that how they are supporting the vocation of marriage and the beauty of family life and how they are offering a parallel of life in a sense by their own vocation and the joy that how they live just shows that there are many ways of which God has called his people to live the state of life, whether it be in the marital state and family life, whether it be in the religious life, clerical state, whether it be in the single state. So it's really exposing the child, to how we respond as a people of God to God's invitation to come and follow. And so both are offering something very beautiful, and it's good for children to see that. And and we'll talk about that a little bit more of myself because that was very influential in my own journey.
Okay, you just gave me the perfect segue. What was your vocation story? Because
Well, I think so. As you just made note of, which is beautiful, in that the role of the family was crucial. We've
okay.
talked a little bit about this before in different ways, but in my upbringing, my grandparents, my parents, my godmother, my godfather sadly died when I was about 3, so I really didn't have a little memory of him, but not a very long memory.
Hmm.
But my godmother and parents and grandparents played a very key role, along with the aunts and the uncles, because the faith was something we not only lived in the
Hmm.
sense of practiced on a given holy day or Sunday, but it was something we that was very important to the family and how we lived it out. So one thing that was so important was not just family, it was the community itself. So the lay faithful in the parish, who set good examples. So the way the priest was in our homes, so I can still see, Father Fossier, who was my pastor of my youth, who I had the joy of caring for at the end of his life.
Oh,
And
wow.
so, but at the beginning of life, he was very influential because he was in our homes. He was visiting my grandfathers, coming in for a cup of coffee and visiting. I mean, you saw him always out and about in the community. He even, would see him on the tractor in the field in his cassock with his big straw hat, cutting grass. He would come out and play baseball with us. He would come out and ride go-karts with us. But at the same time, there was something very respectful about him. Even though he laughed with you and played with you and joked with you, but at the same time, you knew there was still something very special about him, and you didn't treat him like you did your buddy. You didn't
Hmm.
respond to him in the same way that you might have responded to your first cousin. You knew there was something different. At the same time, there was something very common in the sense. What I mean by that is that there was a relationship happening, that he was part of the family. He wasn't way out there, and it kind of exposed something to us, myself especially. Is this something that maybe I can respond to? And I've always knew in the very beginning I had a vocation. That's always was present, and it was just something in prayer. My godmother, who I lived with until she passed, was abandoned by her husband and never was able to welcome children and never remarried, and so she lived in the single state except for a couple of weeks of her life. And
Wow.
so I lived with her until she died. And so no TV. If there was, it was very rare.
Hmm.
It was prayer. It was, playing games. It was something where, so she's the one that really taught me the prayers. We went to daily mass. She lived right next door to the church.
Wow.
So very influential. So not just family, but the extended family, the parish family.
Hmm.
But the parish priest was always influential, and throughout my upbringing.
Hmm. So you wanted to be a priest from when you were a young boy, in a sense?
Sure, there are 2 of us in the family. So Father Gregory Boquet, who is the abbot of St. Joseph Abbey, a Benedictine Abbey in Mandeville, Louisiana. So he's a little older than me by, let's see, I'm 50, going to be 58. So I think he's 62, 63.
Yeah.
And so his grandfather and my grandfather were brothers. And so we all grew up.
So he's your cousin?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So we grew up together in a way. Especially, I grew up with his younger brothers.
Hmm.
But I would go to the Abbey very often, and visit. Brought along with the family, and it was very attractive. And still, religious life still plays a key role. And actually, I was formed by the Benedictines, so my education came from them. But it was just the idea that that it was something there.
Hmm.
And I can tell because my prayer life was something that was very much a part of my youth. And I would stop in the church periodically, coming back from school, or go sometime on the weekend and just when no one else was around and just spend time in prayer. All that had been nurtured by family,
Hmm.
and so it also feeling a sense that God is calling. There's something here that God is asking of me. And so it's always was there,
Hmm.
always there.
Did you go into seminary then right after high school?
So almost. So I attended the local community college,
Okay.
for a little while, and then I transferred out of the community college into St. Joseph Abbey,
Hmm.
into the college there, philosophy, and so that's where the whole journey began. And then that's why I said the Benedictines played a very, very beautiful role, because the liturgy, the prayer life, the divine office, just the kind of very similar to my own upbringing,
Hmm.
just in a different way, because they had a farm, they had lots of property, both now Father Gregory, but Gregory then, and I were in charge of all the grounds. So
Hmm.
he was responsible for the monastic grounds. I was responsible for the seminary grounds. You're talking about over 1,000 plus acres. I mean,
Wow.
so, but we felt like it was like being home. This is what we did at a house. We played on tractors and played on A-frame machines and cut down trees. And, it was like being raised back at home. So it just felt natural,
Yeah.
and so, but the beauty was, being able to go into, the little chapel inside of the seminary, or whether going into the Abbey church. It was always open. It was
Mhm.
never locked. So you had a beautiful opportunity to grow in your prayer life. And that was something that I really appreciate, in my college years in seminary, was that it was strongly emphasized the importance of developing a spiritual life. And if I could say, that's something that I saw, in family members, that I
Mhm.
saw in parishioners. I can still think of my great Aunt Louise, which would have been my dad's sister. So my dad had, my grandfather had 13 brothers and sisters.
Wow.
And so, as I said before, my dad is one of 18, and so just big families. So, but Aunt Louise, who lived almost to be 100, went to daily mass. My Aunt
Mhm.
Tune, these were great aunts,
Yeah.
and I can still see them daily mass almost to the very, very end of their life.
Mhm.
My grandfather, my dad's dad, went to daily mass, and so these were these people, these individuals, blood relation, but family,
Mhm.
parishioners were very influential. And I can still remember sitting down with my Aunt Mayola and Uncle Alphonse. Now, always call them aunt and uncle. So those who might be listening to the family, well, that's not your real aunt and uncle. They were cousins, we always call them Aunt Mayola and Uncle Alphonse. But I can still, they went to daily mass, and I can still, remember their impact and their encouragement. And I think that's the other side, Colleen, of the equation, was what I experienced was encouragement, because
Mhm.
people saw something that maybe I felt, didn't know, that was being confirmed or affirmed in me, and they nurtured it and they
Mhm.
encouraged it. And so, and Uncle Alphonse and Aunt Mayola, it's interesting, I'll just say this, but they had just come back from daily mass, and they were sitting in facing rocking chairs and having, I think, their cup of coffee, and they were going to pray their rosary, and she died right in front of him, just just died right there,
Wow.
very peacefully. In a sense, it was, whatever happened was very quick. But
Yeah.
you think about, those things impact you too, because
Yeah.
these are people who were living their faith, and they believed, they trusted God,
Mhm.
and so you see their influence, upon us. So just
Yeah.
same thing with the parish priest. You only, and I'll tell this little funny story, and
Okay.
I'll toss it back. And Monsignor Fossier Emile is now passed, and from this world. But I remember I always saw him in clerical garb,
Mhm.
either if he was in a suit, but most of the time he was in his cassock. And I remember one time he had been transferred to a new parish, and I was already ordained a priest by that time.
Mhm.
And I had gone to visit with him, check on him, and I went to mass with him, and I come in the house, and he takes off his cassock. Now tell you, never had seen him outside of clerics all these many years.
Yeah.
And I picked on him after that. I said, "You ruined the whole image of you today," because underneath it was this wearing his T-shirt, and he had fake little, which is, they still make the little sleeves, so it makes you like you're wearing a real shirt. And I still can see it. And he laughed. He said, "But it was just the idea." There's the human in a sense,
Mhm.
and just this beautiful person. So, but those relationships was so key, and so even toward the end of life, that relationship that had begun when I was a little boy after
Mhm.
baptism was still happening, as a young man.
That's really beautiful that you got to be present. Like, he was present in your life for so many steps. Did you ever have a point where you, like, ran away from your vocation or just wanted to do something else with your life? Or did you just know from, like, you never swayed from day one saying you wanted to be a priest?
Yeah, no, I mean,
Wow.
might have had other little thoughts along the way, but typically that's just from thinking, of all the temptations, the pressures, the
Mhm.
conversations that you might have with others, the what ifs that,
Yeah.
but, no, that it's, no matter what if came up, it always
Mhm.
would lead back,
Yeah.
that this is definitely my vocation. So it's just knowing it's there, and despite the ups and the downs and the failures and the achievements, I mean, but you know it, you can feel it, and you realize it every day, and it just becomes deeper and deeper within you, and it's a peace. You
Mhm.
feel a peace, a peace. It's for anyone who's married knows the same thing. You know that when you meet that right person, and you feel like this is the person that you can spend your life with, you just know it. If you don't know it, then something else is wrong. But you feel it, you know it, you sense it, You can taste it, and it's similar to this. And each person experiences that in different ways. But
Mhm.
I mean, but ultimately, you're convicted. You know that this is your vocation, and the Spirit of God confirms that.
Oh, that's beautiful. What advice would you have for families that want to maybe encourage a son, daughter who's discerning religious life without exerting undue pressure? Because I think sometimes families can either give them pressure to not, they're like, no, you shouldn't go that route. You should do something practical with your life
Right.
and go get a degree in physics or something like that. Or they exert pressure in the opposite way where they keep saying like, you should be a nun, you should be a nun, you should be a nun without helping nurture and encourage that person's like true vocation, which may be being a nun or a priest, or it may be getting married. How
Right.
can families make sure that they're nurturing a vocation and not exerting undue pressure?
Yeah, and it's a balance because
Mhm,
because every parent wants what is best for their child and seeks their child's well-being. And sometimes you see gifts in them that you want to affirm,
mhm,
and maybe yourself, like so many times you have moms or dads who are sports enthusiasts who themselves active in college, maybe active in their teenage years and playing intramural sports, and just they want their son, their daughter to be as active. And so you
mhm,
see the same thing in that arena, and it can kind of sometimes become overwhelming when you're trying to live out your
mhm,
dreams in your children. But here, just like this in religious life, you might say, "I would love one of my sons. I would love one of my daughters to consider this." So you might see gifts in them that lean in that direction.
mhm,
So I would say, like anything else, the role of a parent is to always be attentive, to be mindful, to be looking, be kind of helping the child to see where their gifts are and where their skills are, and where their heart is starting to be drawn. And I mean, I've known young boys and girls who, avid readers in a young age, reading, books about the saints and reading books about the martyrs and being inspired, but that sometimes will lean itself, maybe there would be a
mhm,
vocation later in life. And sometimes the vocation is not what we thought it would be. It might be a different direction in vocation. And but nonetheless, it's their vocation. And I think we just have to really help kids to not be afraid of asking the question, not be
mhm,
afraid of searching for the answer, and to also pray about it and start early on. We all know that God already has planted his seed. He knows what he would desire for us, and ours is to help that seed to nurture. And that goes back to what I said about my youth in my own home parish. I mean, when I
mhm,
was offered my first mass at St. Anne's, I thanked all the people because they were as equal to that vocation as my mom, my dad, grandparents, and so forth. And though the vocation we know comes from God, they
mhm,
nurtured it. So they played an equal part in nurturing that vocation, which God will bless them for because they participated in God's work.
mhm,
And so I think my answer to that, Colleen, is that we have to participate in God's work. This is God's child. This is God's beautiful gift to us. And so we have to help the child to see what is God asking of you? Where do you see God calling you? In a sense, how do you hear his voice? So it's not going to always come as, Samuel. It's not always going to come as Paul on the road to Damascus. It may not be a slap a back of the head. Most of the time, it just comes in the virtuous life of the child, and the openness of the child, or maybe a pivotal moment. They in the moment of going to the sacrament of penance, maybe feeling something, praying before the Lord in the Blessed Sacrament. So I would say to parents, those are the things to nurture.
mhm,
We should never push.
mhm,
We obviously don't impose ourselves, and even in an over exuberance and an over joyfulness, but to really just nurture it. But we have to provide the environment. So, like I said earlier about the virtuous life of the priest and the religious sister or brother
mhm,
who impacts the culture, mom and dad creates a culture in their home. The church calls it a domestic church. So, how does that family life nurture the vocation?
mhm,
So again, we know that the majority will be called toward marital life. All right. So obviously, if a young man or young girl sees their mom and dad with just deep love and care and support, and if that's something that's being nurtured in them, that's what they're going to want. They want to have what they see in their mom and dad, or what they see in their grandparents, or see in family and friends' parents, and they see this joy and this exuberance and this. It's attractive. It's contagious. Same thing in the religious life, just differently, in the sense of, and that's why I think it's how do we put things in their hands if we see something. But I always take the approach, we should, even if we don't see something, we should still present it to them. help them to see that there are choices, there are opportunities before them that are not necessarily in front of their mind right now. So it's not forcing them, it's not pushing them, but
Mhm.
giving them something to read. How many young men over the years I've given a book that was about a young deacon, a young seminarian who was diagnosed with cancer and was ordained literally on the sofa in his own home with the permission of the Holy Father. And so he never offered Mass. He never presented in a sense of any sacrament. He was ordained and he would die. And so,
Wow.
but his life had meaning. It was a rich meaning.
Do you know what his name was?
Right now, I'm trying as I'm telling the story. I can see the book in my mind. I cannot think of his name,
Okay.
but I will. Maybe we can find it and we can put it into the little notes.
In the
But
description, yeah.
it's an example that it's putting. So I would always put that book into young men's hands who I
Mhm.
thought maybe were considering a vocation. Read this and let's talk about it. Or I've been known to give little volumes of In Conversation with God, to young men or to young women who are aspiring,
Mhm.
especially if they ask a question. That to me tells me something. You're asking me a question means you're thinking of something. So
Mhm.
does it mean it's going to become realized? It might.
Mhm.
In some cases, it doesn't.
What advice would you have for young people who are scared to even consider religious life or the
Yeah.
priesthood?
Well, today, of course, with all the difficulties that we're seeing and have seen over the last 2 decades,
Mhm.
it can be a very frightening for some people to consider it because you're literally in an environment that has become hostile, to the church, hostile to her shepherds and her pastors and religious. And back in 1965, just going back in time, is that when you saw so many religious sisters. Nearly 200,000 in the United States alone. And so, and today you don't see them. It can give the impression, well, maybe we don't need sisters anymore.
Or it's just your idea of what a sister is comes down to the one or two that you saw instead of
Right.
seeing many different ones with many different personalities and
Exactly.
various varying levels of
Right.
joy exuding
Right.
from them. It's not necessarily modeled, so people aren't saying like, "Oh, wow, okay, I'm athletic and I like playing basketball and I'm a
Right.
girl. Why would I go become a cloistered nun?" Like that doesn't seem
Right.
that's not something that they see
But when
modeled.
you get into Africa and you get into Latin America, you move into the Philippines, for example, where you
Mhm.
see many different, various religious communities, vocations are growing.
Mhm.
And so because you kind of presented them kind of an aisle of opportunity,
Mhm.
because some are teachers, some are nurses, some are working in with different services in the church and social ministries in the church. And so, hey, I want to do that. I love this. I'm attracted to that. So, but here in the States, you don't necessarily see that as much, and so you're limited to the sisters you may see. And religious men today are few and very far between, sadly.
I mean, I don't think I saw a nun in a habit. Met consecrated women, and there was a nun at our parish who wore like the 70s habit, but I don't think I saw a nun in a habit till college.
Hmm.
And yeah, it was just something that it never occurred to me that there was a lack. I read the saint stories and I knew about nuns, but
Sure.
it's true. It's you don't see, and I don't know. I
Right.
think I saw monks when I was in high school at one point. I think some of the
Yeah.
Franciscans from New York City, I met some of them, but yeah, it's not something you see modeled.
No, and it's unfortunate because, but then on top of that, when with all the different, sadly, some of the scandals, some of the issues, it can frighten even parents to say, well,
Hmm.
do I want my son or my daughter to really be dealing with that? So my answer always is we should never stifle God's plan,
Hmm.
and we should never stunt the Holy Spirit and how the Holy Spirit is moving among many souls. There are many more vocations out there than are being responded to.
Hmm.
But that's where again we have to inspire and falls back to your first question, and the priest, the religious do create a culture. They
Hmm.
do impact the culture of life around them. And that's why, like in here in the Arlington diocese, we see very strong vocations.
Hmm.
I understand that this coming summer or late spring, that Bishop Burbidge is going to ordain 9 men to the diaconate, which means a year from now or so that, if, God willing, all those men. But as I travel around the states, I'm hearing, an increase in vocations. Now it depends on the region,
Hmm.
but you look at this. But if we peel it back here, especially in the Arlington diocese, a lot of the vocations, a good majority of them, are coming from family life, from very beautiful families that are welcoming children. They're fostering, that virtuous life within their families. In other words, they're creating a culture that fosters and supports and affirms and lifts up, And here, like in Front Royal, as recent, because of the number of vocations, there are 4 priests, in the parish, are serving the parish of St. John's. We have 1 priest currently. I understand they're looking for a 2nd priest at Christendom.
There's 2 there now.
Now 2 there
There are
now.
2.
We have a priest here at HLI. We used to have 3. I'm looking for 2 more priests. So you think about the priest in the community,
Yeah.
just in this little bitty community that are serving the people of God. So it's hard for people to walk around not meet a priest somewhere. They're meeting people. And then in the summertime, Christendom hosts a wonderful opportunity for religious sisters and brothers and priests to come in for vocation awareness, to have workshops. So people in the community now are seeing religious sisters. They're seeing brothers come in and they're going, what do you do? Where do you serve? So that's what we have to keep presenting. And I would say that, as the parents should be fostering and nurturing, the priests need to be aware of how they influence vocation. So if we have a Catholic school, do we go and visit? Do we spend time there? Do we give the children a real chance, and young adults a chance to talk, to see us? If we don't have a Catholic school, do we visit our catechetical programs? Do we go in and see the kids in the school systems and our catechesis and our religion classes? In other words, how are we, I would say this, even as you said earlier, the priest and the religious sister and brother obviously are called to the vocation where they live the single life in their vocation, but yet we're called to be fruitful. We are called to be fathers and mothers and support the church in fostering life.
Spiritual fatherhood and spiritual motherhood.
Exactly. So we need to be fruitful. So we need to be thinking, just as a couple in a different way, obviously, is meant to be fruitful. First command of God was, be fruitful, all right? Multiply. So we have to have the same mindset. So people need to see us. And if you ask, very interestingly, if you were to ask the majority of, and I do this, in the mission field, why did you consider your priestly vocation? Why, or your religious vocation? Inevitably, they refer to someone. And they'll say, oh, it was Sister Octavia who did, always was so happy, smiling. She was it impressed, it left an indelible mark. And it just stirred up the heart. I want to be like her.
So what advice would you then have for people who are listening who are considering discerning religious life, or the priesthood? What advice would you have for them?
Main thing is just don't be afraid. I mean, be open, because I say this, I am a diocesan priest, ordained for a diocese to serve the local church in that diocese. Never in my wildest imagination did I think I would be sitting here with you serving an international pro-life mission. To be, at least for this moment of my life, a missionary. That would never have been on my radar. And I say that only as we step back to when someone's discerning, thinking, reflecting. Don't pigeonhole. Don't stifle, like I said, that the Holy Spirit, but to ask the Holy Spirit to stir up the heart and to allow the heart to hear. And to put aside our fear. I mean, Scripture says, there is no room in love for fear. Fear is useless. So we need to be open. But that goes back to our parents, goes back to our priest and our religious, how we also nurture it, and how, especially, and I'm very mindful of this when I'm with people, especially with young people, not to be negative, not to speak about the struggles or what I call the humanness of the church, or the people that make up the body of Christ. We're sinners, and we can do sometimes harmful things, and we can say things that are harmful. But I make a very, very much an effort not to talk about things in front of kids or of young ones. Even if a parent asks me a question, I'm very, because I don't want to stifle something or to plant a seed of negativity. And those things will come as they grow. They'll see them. They'll understand that they're dealing with human beings that are flawed and weak. And so, but that's not. That's not the church. That's not what God is calling us to. So we have to be mindful of that. And so when people ask me, and still today in airports, why do you remain a priest with all that's happening? Why would I not? The idea is that those things are part of the human fabric, and they're sad, they're tragic, they're painful. But my vocation is not based on all good times. Okay, it's very similar to the beautiful vows of a husband and wife.
Mhm.
Good times and bad times, richer, poorer. In other words, it is for life. This is a life that God has called me to live, and God will give me the grace to live it. We
Mhm.
have to help young people to see that maybe can't see it in the moment. I remember when I was assisting in some, of course, we're all in vocation work. All of us, you're in vocation work. All of us support vocations, just like we're all called to be pro-lifers. So, but the idea is, how do we, when someone, young men who are aspiring would tell me, what if? So if you keep doing that, you'll never make a decision in life, because there's
It's
always
true.
a what if.
Yeah.
You have to be able to also step forward in great confidence and great trust. And so as you discern a vocation and you listen to the Spirit of God, and we listen to the people around us. And isn't it beautiful in the ordination rite of a young man that's going to be ordained deacon and especially ordained priest? There's a question that is posed to the rector of the seminary or to the vocation director who represents the people of God.
Mhm.
And what does the bishop ask? Can you attest that this man who presents himself for the order of deacon or the order of priest is worthy of this office? Whatever the language is, the liturgy has its own, but the idea, then the rector or the vocation director or whoever that person is going to represent the church says, I can attest based on, and just speaks. And that's the part, again, that's why it's not just me. I have a vocation,
Mhm.
might, well, I do. So, but the idea is, but it had to be affirmed by
Mhm.
what other people are seeing and feeling and acknowledging, and practical things, of course. His formation is done. He's done well in his schoolwork. He understands what the church teaches. All that has to be affirmed. All right. So, and that's why religious life is, you don't make solemn vows right out the chute.
Yeah.
No, you spend quite a many years in formation and journeying with the community. And then the community affirms that, yes, you are prepared to live this life. And so sometimes people, as we've seen, journey through seminary, all the way up into diaconate before being ordained. And the realization is, no, this is not for me. And that's okay. I mean, I know many, many beautiful men who went through seminary formation, received degrees, and who are wonderful married men, husbands, fathers, because that is their vocation. They just had to figure it out.
Well, and I've also heard that young men who wouldn't make good fathers won't make good priests. Like, basically, like, in a sense, like, if you're discerning your vocation to the priesthood and you decide that you're not going to be a priest, you're still going to make a good dad. And if you're concerned, like, discerning like married life and you decide that's not for you and you go into seminary, like, as long as you have those same qualities, because like goes back, I guess, to what you were saying with spiritual fatherhood,
Hmm.
of a lot of those virtues do overlap.
That's right. And it's the idea, all of us, no matter who we are in our vocation, are called to sanctity. We're called to
Hmm.
holiness. We're called to journey toward eternal salvation and to help each other along that path. So what we have to do is we have to discern. I mean, I've heard some religious say that every man or woman should discern that they have a vocation to the priesthood or religious life, period, and then decide if they don't have one. And so everyone takes kind of an approach saying that. So in other words, everyone should think they have a religious vocation.
Oh, see, I've
In other
heard the
words,
opposite. I've heard that you should, like, it's the default is assume you're married
right.
unless
And
you
so,
feel called up.
but I think the
Yeah.
thing of it is people trying to find a way of entering the conversation. I think that we don't encourage enough to think about a religious vocation or a priestly vocation.
Hmm.
And I don't think we have enough talk that we should do for married life. And I mean, obviously, we're all raised in families.
Hmm.
Naturally, we're going to see mom and dad first. We're going to see our grandparents first. We're going to see all of our siblings and cousins and so forth. So family life is going to be very rich in our mind,
Hmm.
So it's not until we start entering in to something more. And that's where I was just saying this just last evening. I remember this today. You can't do this on the way that I could do it then because of these sad situations that we've experienced. And that is, I remember as a young priest, that I would working with couples, married couples, preparing couples, but especially couples married. I would encourage them, to nurture their relationship by having a date night or, going out together. But what do, with the kids, they can't always find a babysitter. So
Hmm.
I would babysit. And so now today, you just sadly, because of these situations,
Yeah.
but but I wouldn't do it alone. We'd have other people come, but they were given nights that might be 25 kids in the rectory. There could be 30 kids in the rectory. Now these kids all
Date
today
night for the
are young
parish.
adults today, married themselves today. But it was a way of trying to encourage couples to live their vocation. But in a way, it was also for the young ones to get to know the parish priest, to get to know the religious sister or the brother that might be in the parish, or, it was a way just to nurture. And to be honest, there are a couple of them that are priests today.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't know your impact that you have. And that's why it's also realizing that we're all to be light and salt, and to bring light into the moment. So when people see me as, they hopefully in the airports, in different environments, mixed as it is,
Mm-hmm.
but hopefully some people think, it's wonderful. And many times people will say, great seeing you, Father. Thank you for wearing clerics, Father. Thank you for being here, Father. I've heard confessions on planes. I've been at 38,000 feet, and hearing confessions.
Was there a lot of turbulence?
No, but it's kind of a fun thing to think about. But it's opportunities that you don't know your impact. And all that little negativity things, all those little things, that's just minor. Those are small, insignificant things.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to nurture it. And so that's what I would say to parents, kind of roundabout, coming back to your question, is we don't impose, we offer. We put something before them. And I think in the home, I would encourage, pray the daily rosary as a family. In that rosary, make a specific intention every day. We pray for our children's vocation. So you're planting a seed already, because a kid's going to say, what does that mean? Especially when they're young. But there's your chance. Yeah. Well, we're praying that you will live the life that God desires you to live.
I think that's a really big part of it, is helping helping young adults or children or teens or whoever it is become the person that God wants them to be. And that it's not like discovering your vocation isn't always just you're going to be a priest or, oh, you're going to get married. Like, there's a whole process to get there. Okay, that actually was not phrased well. That is discovering your vocation. But I guess my point is, you hear sometimes at Mass, like, oh, we're praying for vocations for people called to priests in religious life, and then people don't hear marriage, or making sure that young people know that all of those are options. And it's not about, this is a spiritually higher thing to do, and if you want to be holy, you have to go become a consecrated, cloistered nun in the Alps of Switzerland. Right. That, yes, some might be objectively more holy, or you've committed yourself more to God. But if you're becoming the person that God has created you to be, and you're doing the vocation He's calling you to, that's how you'll attain perfect holiness for yourself.
So the goal really is, like you said so beautifully, is how do I help you to live your vocation?
Yeah. It's not about status, is what I was trying to get at. It's not that you have a higher status if you give, because I think I had a little bit of that growing up with, you read all the saint books and they all become nuns. They have an apparition from Mary and they go become a nun. Right. And there's this kind of this idea in your head of, if you're going to be holy and you're going to be a saint, you have to be a religious. And I don't think I'm not saying that kids shouldn't read saint books, but I think that it's important to make sure that children realize that their vocation isn't trying to achieve the highest spiritual status that they can, but actually live out the calling that God has for them.
Well, we know what the church teaches about religious life being a higher vocation.
Yes.
And we don't have time to go down that path and explain all that, but people can easily read that in the catechism and see why the church says that.
Yes.
And there's a reason for that.
Objectively, it is.
Exactly. And so when we see that, so there's something very beautiful there that is that it is indeed a vocation. You are called to live this. But I'm with you, and that's why I think John Paul, now St. John Paul, wanted, to bring more people to see the full body of Christ. In a sense, when you think of St. Takawitha, Kateri,
yes.
Well, this is an example. You think of many other lay women, lay men, not in religious life.
She didn't become. I thought she became.
But but I'm saying is in the very beginning, her life was already being sanctified as not being married. She lived a single state. You think of many others like Josephine Bakhita, who eventually would move toward life. But those were stages that were all preparing them for other things. Yeah. But when you think of Therese of Lisieux's parents, you think of all of her siblings. You think I can go through a litany of examples, and I'm affirming what you're saying. Is that it's not the path to holiness is for all of us. We're all called to be holy as the Father is holy, as Jesus says. And so what we have to discern is how, and we're going to reach
Mhm.
that path. And so is it called in the single, so, because some people are called to the single state of life, not in religious life, not in married life. They're called to the single state. And they're, I mean, I've aunts and uncles, great aunts and uncles. That was their vocation, and they lived it joyfully. It was a cross like any other, to carry.
Mhm.
But I think we have to not be afraid. And today in a way, we kind of say, well, you have to get married or you have to be in this life. No, there is the single state. That is a beautiful state in life, and to give oneself totally to that and to serve the Lord. So what I'm saying and you're saying is, how do we nurture that
Mhm.
and not push in any direction, but we present all three directions, and not present one as greater, other than using the language of the church with religious life and consecrated life. But the idea is just to present them
Mhm.
as goods, something beautiful that is worthy to consider. And like with young people today, right, who think that they can't live chastely, who think that they have to give in, to certain things, which is false. So what do we do in our mission is try to help people to see the beauty and the good and the true, and to reach for it, not be afraid of it. And to, when we speak of the beauty of virginity,
Mhm.
and people think, are you crazy? That no one can live that today. No, there are many people that live that today, and beautifully. And we're all called to live that if we're not in the marital state,
Mhm.
to live a pure, chaste life. And we don't present that as a good. People today in the culture present it as something crazy.
Mhm.
Well, to be a priest today, to be a consecrated man or woman, to be married today really goes against the grain of the culture,
Yeah.
that promotes so many other things. So that's why I love, in working with couples and working in families, that, when they ask the questions that you're asking, to
Mhm.
have the same conversation. If you see something in your son, you see something in your daughter, what are you doing to nurture it?
Mhm.
Nurture it. Don't push it. Don't force it. Now don't do like I usually do, which was a funny little story with couples in my parish. So after they were married, of course, they got on my baby list immediately, my prayer list. And if I, and I had to be careful because, there's so many people's crosses are different,
Mhm.
but kind of learning each couple. But I would be known to send them gifts like baby bibs and baby bonnets, and our little gift here. And again, once I would learn the couple and hear,
Yeah.
and to encourage them, a prayer card praying
Mhm.
for you, trying to nurture something beautiful in them. And at the same time, if I found that a couple was struggling with infertility, I'd send them a card. I'm praying for you. Let me know
Yeah, I
how
was
I
about
may
to
help.
ask, did you ever have any couples
Of
that
course I
reacted
did.
badly to that
Not say
because of
badly, because
infertility?
it's something they don't talk about, but that actually it fostered conversation. But again,
Okay.
you have to really, you have to know your people.
Yeah,
You have
because I could
to.
see that massively
Oh,
backfiring if you have a
absolutely. Of
couple
course you
that
could,
is struggling with
but you
that
have to know your
cross and
people. I don't want to send that to people randomly, but you have to know the families. You have to know them, because it's fear a lot of times that they get
Mhm.
caught up in thinking about welcoming children. So you have to nourish that too. You have to nurture it, because they hear so much negativity out there. Oh, you should wait 5 years or whatever it is. And that kind of stuff. So I'm just saying that there's
Mhm.
so many examples of what we're talking about
Yeah.
that are out there. And as you brought up, we should be speaking about marriage. We should pray for the vocation of marriage. We should encourage, people to pray for that vocation. I think praying for all three states of life.
Mhm.
And to, I bet you never heard an intercession for those who live in the single state. No,
Nope.
it's not spoken. And yet, why not? Because it is a state within the life of a person, and God is calling people to that sacrificial life.
Mhm.
Why are we not talking about it? So if we're going to talk about vocations, then we need to talk about all three. So, and that to me was modeled to me, all of them.
Mhm.
I remember one of my great aunts sat in the very last pew of the church. She was a school teacher. One of her other sisters, both of them never married, but yet they were like mothers to all of us, and joyful, lived long life, beautiful life, happy life. They were beautiful women, and I can think of some of my uncles, and they were more the great uncles, because today you don't see this as much today.
Mhm.
And I think people being pushed thinking that this is not something that you can live. But again, also when you had larger families,
I was about to say larger family seems like a big part of that because I know that having like just seen how families were back like 100 or so years ago, you often had the maiden aunt who stayed at home and helped mom out. And
Right.
she might never have gotten married, but she was still living with her family and
Right.
giving something to her family. And as a single person in today's world, you may not get the opportunity to do that if you are the only
Right.
child or one of
Right.
two children.
Correct.
And so I
That's
think
true.
it when
That's
you
true.
had bigger families, there was a little bit more of a framework where that could happen naturally
Right.
instead of it having to be, I mean, it's gonna be a cross no matter what in a
Right.
sense, but it's a heavier cross no matter
Right.
what in today's day and age if you don't have the community and family
Yeah.
support.
And also just to kind of return back to that original question,
Mhm,
when I think about, when others began to see the vocation,
mhm,
to remember their comments. I mean, I can remember
mm,
many of them, and and even the idea of our family members as well. I can think of this is Abbot Gregory's grandma,
mhm,
Miss Rosalie. But every time I'd see her, I'm praying for your vocation. Persevere, and beautiful woman of a beautiful soul. And so everyone has a part to play in this, and I think that's what I want to encourage is to see the importance of each of us in our contribution,
mhm,
to encouraging vocations within the church, and to realize that everyone makes an impact. So like a married couple changes the culture around them,
mhm,
the priest changes the culture around him, and influences, maybe a better word,
mhm,
transforms it. It's something that we have to see, that that's all part of God's work. It's
mhm.
God's work,
Yeah.
and it's beautiful to be a part of it. And I maybe I just, for myself, and I'll toss it back to you, is, I think of the Benedictine monks that I've known over the years that have now
Mhm,
passed from this world. Every Saturday, if I don't have a particular mass, in a parish or in the mission field, if I'm alone, I'm never alone, the saints and angels are with me in the prayer, and the great communion of saints, of course. But I pray for priests and religious who have gone before us. And
mm,
I have a paper with a long list, and I mention them by name. And then I pray for those that I don't know, because their influence so rich. And maybe this is how I'll close that story, is the late Bishop Warren Boudreaux, who was the founder of my diocese in 1977. Bishop Boudreaux knew me since a little boy, and he ordained me a deacon before he became emeritus. So I was right in that little transition period. He was scheduled to be the ordaining prelate, but that changed. But he wrote me a beautiful letter, and I have it. It's in my home, and I keep it there safe where it's going to stay, with one of his pictures, and I pray for him. And it's a letter of being proud, a
mm,
father being proud of his son, saying, "I'm proud of you. You persevered. You have all these beautiful gifts." And he just goes through this very beautiful. That's affirming.
yeah.
He's affirming. So I think, these are the ways that we have to see each of our role in this. And so that's why today I take this very seriously, because this was done for me.
Mhm,
And if any one of those people along the route could have eventually sidetracked something, by negativity or by whatever, and so thank goodness that did not occur. And so I need to be mindful. Am I doing this?
mhm,
And so that's why I'm always conscious. When I speak of these things, to know my environment, to know who I'm speaking to. Especially, as I said earlier, if I'm dealing with kids or young teenagers, young adults, to be very cautious, not to dissuade, but
mhm.
instead to encourage, despite all the things. Didn't Jesus do that?
Yeah.
He invited them to come and see. So I think that's the joy we have to have.
Okay, so one last question.
Sure.
When you were in parish ministry and did you ever have young people come to you okay, I guess this is two questions in one. Did you ever have young people come to you considering religious life or priesthood? And if so, what were some practical tips or advice that you gave them?
So the one thing I would do is encourage them for adoration,
Okay.
stay close to the sacraments, daily mass, if at all possible. Depends on their age.
Yeah.
Obviously, they're in school. That's kind of hard to go to daily mass sometimes,
Mhm.
because maybe mass is only in the morning in the
Mhm.
parish. So, but adoration, daily rosary, Eucharistic devotion, the praying with sacred scripture. I'd give them things to read. Again, not to overwhelm them, but
Mhm.
just something to give them a guide. So kind of Lectio Divina, a lot of times I would do. Here are a few passages of sacred scripture. Why don't you bring this with you to prayer? and then teach them how to do that. So again, case by case,
Mm-hmm.
person by person, listening to where they are, what they may be further along in the spiritual life than me. I've met young people very, very attuned to the Spirit of God, and very impressed by that. And so it's not a question of always being the leader. Sometimes it's being led, right? And so, but allowing that to happen. So that's what I would often do. And so, if a parent came to me and asked a question, again, I would say, what age are we talking about? Tell me a little bit, and I might do the same thing, but let the parent do it.
Mm-hmm.
But you do it with them too. Teach them.
Mm-hmm.
So the parents see their role, and because like I said, my godmother, who, we prayed together every night, and something so beautiful. And I have a great memory of her, even though she died when I was 12 years old, but I have a very vivid memory of her and her influence. And, God knows I gave her every reason to lose her temper, in my childhood, but she was a saintly woman, and just an enduring soul, just beautiful. And that's left a beautiful mark on me. And and that's why I try to kind of repay it, just kind of pay it forward, if you will, keep giving it away, because that's what was done for us. Oh, does that help a little bit?
It does. No, that's beautiful. I was glad to have a little bit of practical tips there at the end for anyone
Yeah.
listening who might just be considering this and wondering what to
Sure,
do. So,
sure. And
yeah,
so I hope that helps a little bit.
it does. This
Yeah.
has been a really good conversation.
Oh, good. Well, thank you very much. This is such a wonderful subject. I mean, it's something that, that again, I just wish, in parish life and in family life, that these things were talked about. And it is. Actually, I've been in many families where they'll bring me in for supper and say, talk about vocations.
Well, this has been a great conversation, Father. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much, Colleen. Look forward to being with you again soon.
Yes, definitely, Father. And to all of our listeners, please like and subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, and check out the new ebooks that we have coming out, and keep on living the culture of life. God bless.